Um, I wanted to talk a little bit today about diversification and diversification from the energy sector. And I'm going to sort of start with perhaps a surprising statement, but I believe that if we want to diversify our economy, we've got to stop ignoring our strongest sector, which is our energy sector. That might sound sort of counterintuitive, but I will explain why in the presentation. So, sorry. I'm getting this to work. Oh. So, the key themes I want to sort of talk about, the three key ideas. The first one is that diversification requires competitive companies. I don't think we talk enough about companies when we talk about diversification. We tend to talk about sectors. But sectors don't do business. Companies do business. And so you have to have competitive companies who are able to trade and to be able to export. That is where we have to think about how we're going to have companies who are competitive and able to be able to do business in Trinidad and to do business internationally. The second sort of key idea is that competitiveness is driven by high standards. And standards are crucial to having competitive companies. If you want to be able to trade and you want to be able to do business globally, you have to meet very high quality standards, safety standards, all the standards you need to be able to do business internationally. And the third key idea that I want to put across is that we need local institutions to set and enforce the standards and to ensure that there's a level playing field. So you need institutional framework within a country in order to be able to enforce standards. So there's institutional framework, institutional support is crucial for competitiveness and for diversification. Let me start a little bit about some context, some background context about diversification, the need for diversification in our energy sector. The first thing I want to just talk about was just really our history of oil and gas production. I think that often people in Trinidad don't realize what's actually happened to our oil and gas economy. The top line here, the brown line is our gas production, and the oil, the green is our oil production. And you can see we had this absolutely stunning increase in gas production in Trinidad and Tobago from the mid-90s through to the mid-2000s. That was as Atlantic, the 4 trains of Atlantic came on, and some very large petrochemical facilities, like the Atlas methanol plant and the M5000 plant, and some other very large methanol producers, and some large ammonia production as well. As that all came in, we had this massive increase in gas production. That peaked in 2010, and since then we've seen some small declines. And the challenge for Trinidad and Tobago in our gas economy is how do we maintain this plateau, as we call a plateau of production, because the thing I think people often don't remember about oil production and gas production is that when you drill a well and you start producing, you'll get peak production one year, and then from the next year onwards, production will decline. So if you want to maintain a plateau of production, you have to keep drilling new wells, bringing new developments on each and every single year. So it's a sector where you have to always be reinvesting every year in order to keep production levels up. So just to maintain, just to stay still, you have to keep on drilling. And you can see what happens in Trinidad's oil sector from the early 1980s onwards. We've had this continuous decline. A little bit of an increase here when in the early 2000s when BHP brought on the Angostura field. But other than that, we've had this continuous decline in our oil production because we're not reinvesting constantly in increasing our oil production. Okay. So I'll just break that out in a little bit more detail. You'll see over the last few years, we've had this since 2005, the big decline every year, a 9% decline in our oil production. That's because the reservoirs from which we're producing are old and mature reservoirs, and the production simply declines to a natural decline. we managed to halt that decline in about 2011, and we now are flat, but we're not managing to get the production back up again. There is oil in Trinidad to get to produce. There's plenty of oil. We don't have a shortage of oil in the ground. We have a shortage of investment going in order to increase that oil production, and it needs a lot of investment to begin to increase that production again. So that's what's happening in oil. In gas, what we'll see in gas is this is the monthly figures. And just one point I just wanted to make about the monthly data. I often hear people say that, oh, you can't get data on the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, that's just not true, because it is actually all available on the Ministry of Energy's website. You just got to go and look for it. It's not very well presented. It's not very nicely presented. I think they could do a much better job of doing a nicer job of how it looks, but it's there. And they have monthly reports, and it's only a couple of months late. I mean, it comes out about 2 months late, but the data is there. So I think there's April data up at now. So all the data on gas production. So you'll see what we've had is this. We had this increase in our gas production. The green line here is approximately what the demand is for gas in Trinidad, and that's the demand from the Point Lisas plants and from the Atlantic facilities. It's about 4.2 billion cubic feet of gas per day. I say approximate because it's always going to change a little bit on a day-to-day basis. If you have a plant who's offline, or or one of the Atlantic facilities is not working, it's always going to be. It's not an exact number, but it's around that 4.2 billion cubic feet of gas a day. What you'll see is that around 2010, we were meeting and exceeding that level of production. So all the plants were full, and they were all making lots of money, and and everyone was happy. You then begin to see this production decrease, and we're seeing these periods where there is not enough production to meet what the demand is, and that has meant that plants in Point Lisas have not been operating at capacity. Atlantic has not been operating at capacity. The investments which are made into the facilities in Point Lisas are done on the basis that they will be operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that's how they are profitable. They're not made to turn on and off. They have to operate constantly. And when they're not receiving all the gas that they need and their production is therefore curtailed, they're not making the profits that they need to repay their investments. So this is a very serious problem for Point Lisas and for Atlantic. You'll see some periods where there was quite a big drop. There's sort of a period where there was a big drop in a couple of months. That was usually when there was a maintenance program happening in Trinidad's upstream gas production. So a platform will be going down offshore for a maintenance program. And then what happened is that everybody, also at that time, then all the maintenance programs in Point Lisas happen at the same time, and Atlantic will happen at the same time. So people to try to do everything together to minimize the impact. But what you've seen over this year is that you've seen constantly we're not meeting what the demand is. So people are operating at below what the capacity is. There's no more maintenance work to be done. They can't be taking plants down. And this is a serious problem for our economy. Now, why is it happening? It's happened because you have to reinvest every year in order to keep your gas production up. And we had a period, 2008, 9, 10, when the investment dollars were not going into our upstream gas production, and as a consequence, we are now having the impacts of that, of not having enough production. There are new facilities coming on which will help backfill and solve that problem in a couple of years' time. But we do have a problem with that with gas production. We have a very large demand. Our economy has been built on that large demand. Our economy has been built on the taxes which is received for that large demand, and we have fantastic facilities like this because of those tax dollars. There is a serious problem in Trinidad and Tobago that if we do not have the investment going into upstream gas production in the future, we will not have the resources which we need as a country to maintain the levels of expenditure which have been going on. So we have some very, very serious decisions which have to be made, because the new fields are often smaller. They need a different fiscal regime. They need a different pricing mechanism, and these are all very serious decisions which have to get made now. The government has just done a gas master plan, And really what it shows is that if we don't make decisions, we're going to be facing a situation in the next few years where we do not have enough gas to keep our facilities running. If we do make the decisions, we have the gas available because the investment will go in and we can produce the gas that we need. So that's the context which Trinidad is in at the moment. And that's irrespective of who wins the next election, we'll have to make decisions. This is not a party political issue. It's an issue that the decisions which are going to have to be made, and we need leaders who are going to be willing to make those hard decisions. So just to summarize our current context then. Trinidad and Tobago is a mature oil and gas province. We have a challenge in turning around our declining oil production, and we have a challenge to maintain our gas production at its plateau. What that means is there's very limited or no scope for volume growth in the gas economy. Our economy grew from the 1990s into the 2000s by increasing the volume of our gas production. So every year we were bringing on new facilities, and that really helped our economy grow. We went through that period of very rapid growth as new plants were being built, as gas production was being increased, and that really helped our economy grow. That is not in our future for the next 10 years. It doesn't look like we have the gas resources that are going to be available to allow us to significantly increase the volumes. Unless something unexpected happens, and possibly with deep water, when those developments happen, which is probably going to be realistically 7 to 10 years from now, that might change it, and we may be able to grow the volumes of gas production in the country again, but not in the short-term future. So that means we have to focus on increasing the value that we get from our resources. And the other part of the context is that we don't have the diversification. So we have this big concern for our economy. We don't have diversification, so we have nothing else to replace the gas and the oil sector, which has dominated our economy. So that's the context we have at the moment. But I want to then paint a picture now, perhaps a more positive picture, about how we can increase value. The big thing for me about increasing value and diversifying our sector is to take the strengths that we've got in our energy sector and to use those strengths to move into the services which are associated with the energy sector, where we have some very strong companies who are able to offer those services in Trinidad, and then have those same companies beginning to export the services into other markets. As they do that, it creates the economic opportunities for us to continue. Okay, so standards are key to that process of diversifying our economy. Standards are key to be able to develop your marketplace position for your companies. And I put up here on the screen a quote that I very much like from the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. And many of you may know ANSI. You may see it on a lot of products, that there's a whole series of ANSI standards. But ANSI is very clear what it's about. Its role is to empower its members and its constituents to strengthen the US marketplace position in the global economy. So the American National Standards Institute certainly sees itself as having standards which are going to help US companies penetrate global markets. And I think we have to think in the same sort of way that ANSI thinks. Local content is one of the key ways which you can increase the value from your energy sector. That local content means more of the inputs into the sector come from domestic companies. That means that more of the investment dollars you place into the sector stay within the country. We tend to think about local content along two main axes at the moment. One is about how many nationals are employed in the sector, and the other one is about how much money do you spend with local companies. And that tends to be the discussion about local content we have. And what you tend to do is you set yourself targets that you want to increase how many nationals are employed. So you want to go from 50% of the employees in the sector being nationals to 90%. Now in Trinidad, we do well on that axis. We already have most of our industry is dominated by Trinidadians, so we score close to 100% on that axis. A lot of African countries you go to score very low on that axis, and they're trying to get more people employed, more nationals employed in their industry. And then in terms of, I'm in trouble with this clicker, yeah. Spend to local companies, again, you'll see a lot of countries setting rules about how much has to be spent with local companies. This is a local content spend that you have to, 60% of the value of a project has to go to a local company as it's being built, and you try to increase that over time, and that's what local content, a lot of local content policy is about, and that's a lot of discussion in Trinidad is around that sort of thing. I like to think about how local content a little bit more widely. I like to think it along an axis of having competent and certified workers and having competitive local companies, and then working on both of those axes to try to drive sustainable development. And you do that through having collaboration between the state and the private sector. Obviously, we have invested very large amounts of money in Trinidad and Tobago in having a competent and certified workforce. We've invested hugely in the University of Trinidad and Tobago. We've invested hugely in the National Energy Skills Center and people like MIC. So there's a lot of investment dollars going in there. You can see the money is being spent in Trinidad and Tobago on getting that competent and certified workforce. I think we haven't thought as much about how do we have competitive local companies, and what the companies need in order to be competitive. They need and the strong balance sheets that they need to be able to venture out globally. And I think that too often we talk about diversification and not talk about about companies and what companies need to do. One of the best ways to have competitive companies is by having those companies service sophisticated customers. There's a lot of discussion from people like Porter around this sort of stuff, around how do you actually have competitive companies who are able to develop new products and services. Well, one is if you have customers who are sophisticated and ask you for those things, and then as a company you'll begin to deliver them. So having sophisticated customers is a key driver to competitiveness. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a sector of the economy which is a very sophisticated sector of the economy, and so we have some very sophisticated companies who are customers who are buying the services, and those customers are the multinational oil and gas companies. They are very sophisticated companies, and they ask for a huge amount from their suppliers to them. That means, and there's about 22 of them, and they are very big, and they're a very important part of our economy, and they buy lots of goods and lots of services here. Because they demand people who supply them to be sophisticated companies in order to meet what their standards are, we therefore have companies who are used to meeting those standards. One of the big things is the health, safety, environmental standards and their quality standards. That meeting the HSE requirements is an arduous task. Just to get your foot in the door with a multinational company like a BHP or a BG or a Methanex, you have to meet very, very high safety standards, and you have to show that if you're a supplier that you meet what their requirements are, because they're not going to take you into their plant or into their facilities unless you meet those requirements. So that drives the service industry who services those companies to also have very high health, safety, and environmental standards. And quality standards. That's where you see a lot of people across the road here. You'll see IAL Energy Services with this big ISO 9000 across the top of it, because it's had to meet those quality standards in order to supply to the industry. You also need to have certified workers. You'll often be asked to show. Don't just tell me you've got competent workers, but show me that they're certified. So when they come on my facility, that you can show that they really know what they're doing. So having certified workers, and increasingly corporate governance. Companies are being asked to show that they have corporate governance structures in place. Because of the anti-bribery legislation in the US and in the UK and in Canada, that our multinationals who are US or UK or Canadian based ask their suppliers to please show us what your corporate governance structure is, so we know that we're dealing with a company who's not involved in bribery and corruption. So that's becoming increasingly important. Going too fast. This clicker either seems to go forward one slide or two slides at a time. Going through it almost. Can I get back? Can you click me back because I'm, okay, no, one. Okay, there. Okay. Trade associations. One of the features of the American economy is that they have an association for everything. You go in the US and there's an association for, there's a pest management association, a psychiatrist association, and probably a seating manufacturers association. Associations for everything. The US economy thrives on having these associations which represent their industries. In Trinidad, we have a few associations, and you have the Chambers of Commerce who represent the industry, but having strong associations is really important for how industries operate. Because it's the associations which help their member companies meet standards. But even more importantly, even better, is if you can have associations who set the standards. And that is not something which is unusual around the world. If you look at most of the standard-setting bodies, they're usually associations who set standards. So people in the energy sector would often talk about, people hear about APITO. What's APITO? APITO is just a UK body who sets training standards. API, an API standard, which in the energy sector seems like it's some sort of God-given sort of thing. That's the American Petroleum Institute. It's an American association of petroleum companies, and they've met together and set what the standard is. DNV, who are sort of seen as these really, really high standards for anything to do with quality and safety of equipment. DNV is a Norwegian shipping bureau. It's an association. That's how it was set up. So these are all trade associations which then end up becoming these very important certification and standard-setting bodies. So having trade associations to help you meet standards is important, but even better is if you can set your own standards and say these are the standards by which we're going to operate. And that is, I think, is how you actually have a well-developed economy. And are able to compete and have your standards recognized. And we're doing that. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we actually have something called Safe to Work. This is a Trinidadian developed, designed system to certify our member companies to meet the HSE requirements of the international operators. You'll see across the picture, the one there, Rampersad Mutala, who's in the audience, is in the picture there somewhere. We've got all the international operators who work here to sign an agreement saying that they're going to recognize this as a standard that they're going to work by for anybody to enter any of their facilities. That had to be validated by the global officers of those companies. So BP had to get this validated as meeting what their global standard is. It had to be as good as or better than what they're using in other jurisdictions. And that's something which we developed. We developed the people to do the certification. And today we have 370 companies, service companies and contractors in our industry who meet this standard. That's something which we developed here in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm very proud of it. It's a great system which we developed, and we had a lot of good people involved in making it happen. But it shows that if we put our mind to it and decide, no, we can do it. We don't have to just use somebody else's standards, somebody else's requirements. We can develop our own, okay? And we can use that as the standard for working in our economy. But the next step is, and where my dream and my ambition is we've got to take this outside Trinidad now. So in the same way as APITO has become a global standard, we've got to make this into a standard outside Trinidad and Tobago. Then it's a Trinidad standard. So all our companies here who know it, have worked it, they've got a huge advantage when they go to a market which is also having to use this standard. So we're trying, first of all, in our small way, with Suriname and with Guyana, our closest neighbors. We have a lot of companies working. So my vision is to have this standard, a Trinidadian standard, also operating in Suriname and Guyana. That means when the Trinidadian companies have got their certificates already, so when they have to compete against the company from Korea, they've got an advantage because it's using the Trinidad system which we're using. So those are sort of things which I think we need to work on around standard development if we are going to have competitive companies which are able to operate globally. So just my final slide. We often talk about diversification in this sort of macro way. I want to talk about it in a micro way. I want to talk about it companies. Companies need to be strong enough to be able to compete and to work outside work outside your country, offering the services globally. We have those companies in the energy services sector in the country. We need to help them and encourage them. Clusters, this is something which economists often talk about. You get companies who are able to work together they'll compete on some items, but they'll also cooperate in other areas. We have strong clusters in the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. We see it in Point Lisas with the Point Lisas Energy Association, where the CEOs will work together on things where they're not competing on. We see it in things like safety, where we have both the upstream companies and the downstream companies and the service industry working together. So we can create these clusters, and they can work together. We need more of them, but it can work. You need strong associations, and we have some. We have the Manufacturers Association, we have the Energy Chamber, and we have some of these groups, but we need more of them, and they need to be stronger, and they need to be built up. And that our national diversification policy needs to see these associations as playing a crucial role in diversifying our economy. But lastly, and most importantly, we need companies. We need companies who can compete globally. But when I look at our energy sector, and I just think sitting here in SAPA, and I can look across, in my mind across the road here, I can see companies like IAL Engineering Services. IAL Engineering Services sells equipment which they manufacture here in Trinidad to the global oil and gas industry. You go into IAL, you'll see a board up there, and they're shipping things to Azerbaijan, they're shipping things to Angola, they're shipping things to the US, to Brazil, to everywhere in the world, right here. Kenson Production School have got a school in Uganda. So the Trinidadian service company here who are training people in the new growing oil and gas industry in Uganda. I think of Thackray Energy Services. They've got operations in the US, in Canada, in Belize, in Colombia, in Brazil, in Suriname, Venezuela. I think of Damus, who basically any large tank you'll see constructed in the Caribbean has been built by Damus. I think of companies like Delta Logistics, small Trinidadian family and business who have just invested multi-millions in buying vessels to service the offshore oil and gas industry in Trinidad. HHSL, I can name probably 30 companies who are strong local Trinidadian-owned service companies. Massey with a joint venture with the Wood Group operating now in Colombia. They've got Massey Fabric Maintenance working in Suriname. So we have the companies, the service companies, who are able to do this. We just need to recognize them, celebrate them, and build our diversification strategy around those Trinidadian companies who are able to compete globally. Thank you.